The room shimmered with gold light and polished silver. Someone's laugh cracked through the air, too bright, too sharp. I watched a thick envelope slide across the table, my sister's hand trembling as she opened it. Gasps, then applause. The words "Lake House" and $350,000 floated like confetti. My glass stayed untouched. Then another envelope, thin, plain, was placed in front of me. Every sound disappeared. Eyes turned. "Go on," someone said softly. I opened it. Paper rustled once. Whatever was written inside made her smile freeze before I even finished the first line. I was 9 the first time I understood how the air in our house worked. Praise moved in one direction. It floated toward my sister, warm and endless, while the rest of us breathed what was left. She came home with perfect grades, trophies, certificates. I came home with drawings on lined paper. Mom smiled at mine, then set them aside so she could frame hers. Dad said I was steady, the kind of word people used when they had nothing better. At family dinners, my sister's stories filled the table. Mine ended before they began. I learned to cut my food quietly to wait for a pause that never came. When she got into college, we celebrated for days. When I passed my nursing exam, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from her phone. It wasn't cruelty, it was muscle memory. Everyone had their part. Mine was to notice the silence. Holidays followed the same choreography, her entrance, everyone rising the room, orbiting her brightness. She once said I was so calm, it's like you're not even here. I laughed because that's what was expected. In photos, I stood just off center, half in shadow, half invisible. The pattern deepened with time. When her engagement was announced, I helped pick the dress, the flowers, the playlist. When mine was, she cried in the bathroom. Mom followed door, closing behind them. I remember staring at the gravy cooling on my plate, the sound of muffled sobs, the whisper of comfort that wasn't for me. Later, Mom's hand on my shoulder. "Let's keep the wedding small, sweetheart, just to keep things peaceful." Peaceful. That word had weight. It meant quiet. It meant don't upset her. After that, I stopped trying to fit noise into spaces already claimed. I worked, saved, built my own routine. Breathing counted. Folding laundry counted, silence counted. When people asked about family, I said we were close. It was easier than explaining the distance measured in tone, not miles. The last time I visited before that Christmas, I brought homemade cookies from the hospital kitchen. Charlotte said she couldn't eat sugar that week, some cleanse. Mom took them anyway and set them next to the untouched fruitcake Charlotte liked. I remember thinking the table looked like a museum of things she might want later. That night, lying in my studio above the Chinese restaurant, I heard the clatter of pans, the hiss of oil below. I counted my breaths until the ceiling stopped shaking. The smell of sesame and detergent mixed in the air. That was when I realized the truth. My silence wasn't patience. It was training. Every skipped word, every unfinished sentence had been rehearsal for something larger. I just didn't know yet what I'd need it for. By the next winter, the pattern had turned into choreography. Every visit home began the same way, her laughter filling the hallway before she even stepped inside. Mom's perfume already on her coat, Dad rushing to open wine. My arrival was quieter. A coat hung by the door, a hello that disappeared into conversation already happening. Charlotte talked about her campaigns, her clients, her new office. Dad called her our superstar. When I mentioned a patient who'd recovered after a long coma, Mom smiled politely and reached for the salt. I learned to measure affection in eye contact. 3 seconds was a miracle. 5 meant someone had remembered I existed. When she and Ethan announced they were trying for a baby, the house became a shrine to hope. Ultrasound magnets, fertility calendars on the fridge, scented candles that claimed to balance energy. Every conversation circled the same theme: patience, prayer, waiting. I was careful with my words, afraid even a hint of joy might sound like gloating. But the months turned into years, and the waiting became bitterness. She started skipping gatherings, claiming she couldn't stand to see normal families. Mom would defend her. "She's just sensitive." I would nod, knowing sensitive was the family's way of saying dangerous. When James and I got engaged, Charlotte cried again. Not soft tears, sobbing, trembling, leaving the table mid-meal. Mom and Dad followed, leaving me and James with cold plates and the hum of the refrigerator. "It's fine," I whispered, even though it wasn't. We planned a small wedding just like they wanted. Charlotte was my maid of honor, a title she wore like a burden. She showed up an hour late to the bachelorette dinner, left after one drink, and gave a toast at the reception that began with, "It's been such a hard year for me." People clapped. I smiled for photos, eyes dry, fingers pressed into my bouquet until the stems bruised. After the wedding, the imbalance deepened. Charlotte started making small comments. "You've always had it easier, Piper. You wouldn't understand." Easier. The word stuck to me like static. I wanted to tell her about the double shifts, the missed meals, the quiet tears after long nights at the hospital, but what was the point? Any truth that didn't center her became noise. When I finally got pregnant 7 months later, I kept it secret for a while. I knew what would happen. And when I did tell them, it played out exactly as I'd feared. Charlotte's face drained of color, then flushed red. She accused me of cruelty, of timing it to hurt her. Mom sat frozen. Dad stared at his plate. I stood there holding the ultrasound photo, realizing my family could watch me be humiliated and still call it keeping peace. A week later, I miscarried. The house stayed silent. No flowers, no call from my sister. When Mom finally reached out, she repeated Charlotte's words as if they were scripture. Maybe it was the universe's lesson not to take things for granted. I stopped answering her texts after that, not out of anger, but clarity. The message was simple. My pain didn't count unless it made someone else feel better. That was the moment something in me went still. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the kind of silence you keep before a storm. By the next spring, we spoke only through group texts. My parents sent cheerful reminders about Sunday dinners, attaching photos of the table as if proof of harmony could fix what was broken. I replied with polite excuses, night shift, early rounds, chart backlog. Half were true. Most were self-preservation. When we did show up, the air felt managed. Mom planned menus that avoided triggers. No talk of babies, no stories about work, no jokes that might make Charlotte uncomfortable. James would squeeze my hand under the table, our secret Morse code for hold still. We lasted through birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, each gathering quieter than the last. Then Easter came. My aunt mentioned her daughter's engagement, and I watched it happen, the small shift in Charlotte's face, the tight smile, the silence spreading like spilled wine. 10 minutes later, she was gone, crying in the bathroom, the same script as always. The room rearranged itself around her absence. My aunt looked embarrassed, her daughter's engagement gone erased. I caught James's eye. He didn't speak until we were in the car. "This is insane," he said. "One person decides when everyone's allowed to be happy." I didn't argue. I was too tired. Somewhere along the way, exhaustion had replaced anger. I just wanted distance, enough space to hear myself think. So we began to disappear, one skipped dinner, then another. Mom noticed. "It feels like you're punishing us," she said over the phone. I wanted to tell her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just done playing a role in a play that never changed acts. By December, our absences had become an event in themselves. Mom called 3 days before Christmas Eve, her voice tremoring with hope. "Please come this year. It would mean so much to your sister." My first instinct was no. Then James said quietly, "Maybe it's time to stop running from the noise." I didn't know if he meant confrontation or closure. Maybe both. So we went. The house glittered when we arrived, garland candles, the smell of roast and cinnamon. Charlotte greeted us with a smile too bright to be real. For the first hour, everything seemed rehearsed. She asked about my job. I asked about her latest project. Mom kept refilling glasses. Dad laughed louder than usual. Dinner came and went, and then Dad stood clearing his throat. "We have something special for you two this year." Mom disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a large envelope. She handed it to Charlotte. The room leaned forward as she opened it. Gasps applause, the word Lake House. Charlotte cried beautiful tears that caught the candlelight. "It's the cabin," she whispered. "They bought us the cabin." I felt James's hand find mine under the table. I smiled because that's what you do when history repeats. Then Dad said, "And we have something for you too, Piper." Mom reached under the tree and pulled out a smaller envelope, thin plain white. She placed it in front of me with the same smile people give children before a trick. "Go ahead," she said. The room quieted. My pulse matched the clock on the wall. I opened it. Inside, a folded letter written in my mother's looping handwriting. "Read it aloud," Dad said. "We want everyone to hear." I looked up, unsure if this was another setup or something else entirely. Charlotte's smile held steady, confident, radiant. I took a breath, flattened the paper, and began to read. "Dear Piper and James," I began. My voice trembled once, then steadied. "We've watched you work hard for everything you have, and we're proud of the adults you've become." The room stayed still. Charlotte's smile faltered just slightly. I kept reading. "Piper, your dedication to your patients, your strength through difficult times, and the grace you've shown even when others failed to show you the same have reminded us what real character looks like." Mom's eyes glistened, but it wasn't sadness. It was recognition, the kind that comes too late. "James," I continued, "you've stood by her quietly, steadily through years of imbalance that we now realize we allowed to grow unchecked." The silence shifted heavier now. Charlotte's hand froze halfway to her glass. I read the next line slower. "We know you've been saving to buy your first home, and we want to give you what we should have years ago." My throat tightened. I could feel Charlotte watching me. "We're giving you $45,000 toward your first house," I said, "and covering the remainder of your student loans." The air cracked. Charlotte's face turned the color of ash. Ethan looked down at his plate. James exhaled softly beside me, a sound that was half relief, half disbelief. "This is not a loan," I read. "It's not charity. It's acknowledgement for the times you were treated unfairly and stayed silent to keep the peace." Charlotte's fork slipped and clattered against her plate. The sound felt like punctuation. I kept my eyes on the letter. "We're tired of pretending this dynamic is normal. We love both our daughters, but we can't keep enabling behavior that hurts one to soothe the other." When I looked up, Charlotte was staring at me, her expression raw anger, shame, disbelief tangled together. "You planned this," she said finally, her voice low but trembling. "I didn't," I said, folding the letter once. "They did." "This is humiliating," she snapped, standing up. "You made me look like the villain in front of everyone." Dad's tone was calm, almost clinical. "No one made you anything. We wrote down the truth." Charlotte turned to me. "You must be proud of yourself. You finally got your revenge." I set the letter down. "If that's what this feels like, maybe that says more about you than me." James stood, voice even but firm. "For years, you've treated her like her existence was a threat. That ends tonight." Charlotte's lip quivered. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," he said. "And so does everyone else now." Ethan spoke next, soft but steady. "Charlotte, enough." Her shoulders dropped. For the first time, she looked small, like someone who'd run out of scripts. Mom's voice broke the silence. "We love you, honey, but this family can't keep orbiting one person's feelings." Charlotte pressed her palms to her eyes. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. Dad leaned forward. "Then start by listening." The only sound was the fire crackling behind us. I reached for the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table between us. "This isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about balance." For a moment, no one moved. Then Charlotte sank back into her chair, eyes wet but no longer defiant. The fire popped once, releasing a spark that drifted upward and vanished. Outside, snow began to fall against the window, soft, steady, soundless. No one spoke again. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. The days after Christmas passed like slow breath. The letter stayed on my nightstand, folded once edges soft from my fingers. I didn't reread it, but I didn't put it away either. It wasn't just paper, it was proof that the silence had finally spoken. Charlotte called a week later. Her voice was thin, unfamiliar. She said she was starting therapy, that Ethan was helping her find someone local. There was no grand apology, no script, just quiet. I told her I hoped it helped, and I meant it. By spring, James and I closed on a small house on the edge of town, white siding, narrow porch, 2 rooms that smelled faintly of paint and promise. The day we got the keys, I stood in the empty living room, hearing the echo of my own footsteps. For once, no one else's voice filled the space. Mom and Dad visited a few weeks later. They brought a potted fern and left before sunset. There were no speeches, no long looks, only a warmth that didn't need explanation. That night, I found the letter again, tucked it into a drawer, and watched the light fade through the curtains. Somewhere far away, I imagined the lake house too. the water still untouched, holding its own reflection. Maybe one day we'd meet there again in some quieter version of family. For now, the world had gone still enough for me to hear the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of my own breathing, the smallest sounds of a life that finally belonged to me. Some people think revenge means winning louder. It doesn't. Sometimes it's the sound of a page folding a breath, slowing a door closing softly behind you. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just read the truth and let it land where it needed to. Peace doesn't arrive with applause, it settles like snow covering what's been said, softening the ground so you can finally walk forward. If you've ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, remember this: silence can build walls, but it can also build strength. Thanks for watching my story. Tell me in the comments what moment finally made you stop apologizing for being the calm one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where justice isn't loud, but it lasts.